Princess Callista stood rigid as the royal attendants dressed her in the ceremonial robes. Her four-fingered hands trembled slightly, betraying the fear she fought to hide. Today, she would be given to a human, a creature her people had only recently discovered and already feared. "Your sacrifice ensures the safety of our people, Your Highness," said her chief advisor, adjusting the ornate headpiece that crowned her iridescent blue skin. "The humans have proven unexpectedly resilient." Resilient was a polite word for it. The Vryxian Empire had conquered 17 star systems before encountering Earth. They had expected another easy victory. Instead, humans had defeated their forces in 3 major battles, displaying military prowess that shocked the Imperial command. Now, the Empire sought peace through an ancient tradition, offering a royal bride to their worthy opponents. Callista was the chosen sacrifice. "The human soldier awaits," announced the guard at her chamber door. The princess took a deep breath, her extra set of air sacs filling beneath her ribcage. She had been trained since birth to serve the Empire. This was her duty, no matter how terrifying. Lieutenant Jack Foster stood uncomfortably in the grand hall of the Vryxian diplomatic vessel. His dress uniform felt tight around the collar, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other as alien diplomats stared at him with their large, unblinking eyes. "Remind me why I'm here again, sir," he whispered to Colonel Harris beside him. "Because you led the team that captured their flagship, son. You're a hero, and they requested you specifically for this ceremony." Jack frowned. The battle had been pure chaos. He'd just done what was necessary to keep his squad alive. Now he was being paraded around like some kind of trophy. A low, resonating tone filled the chamber, and the alien straightened to attention. Her Royal Highness, Princess Callista of House Vryx, daughter of the Eternal Emperor, Jewel of the 7 Moons, announced a translator device. Jack's jaw nearly dropped when the princess entered. She moved with fluid grace, her blue skin shimmering with subtle patterns that seemed to shift with her emotions. Her eyes, large, silver, with vertical pupils, scanned the room before settling on him. He saw something in those alien eyes that he recognized immediately: fear. The Vryxian Emperor's representative stepped forward, speaking in their clicking, musical language while the translator converted his words. "In recognition of humanity's strength and honor, we offer Princess Callista as bondmate to Lieutenant Jack Foster, uniter of our peoples." Jack's eyes widened. "I'm sorry, what?" Before he could get clarification, the princess was led to stand before him. Up close, he could see the fine trembling of her hands, the rapid pulse at her slender neck. "I am yours, human warrior," she said in carefully practiced English, her voice melodic but strained. "My life is in your hands." Colonel Harris nudged him. "Accept the gift, Lieutenant. This is diplomacy." Jack swallowed hard. Nothing in his military training had prepared him for being given a person, an alien princess, no less, as a gift. Everything about this felt wrong, but he recognized the delicate political situation. "I accept this honor," he managed to say. The Vryxian officials seemed pleased, completing the ceremony with several ritual gestures. Throughout it all, Princess Callista maintained her composure, but Jack couldn't ignore the dread radiating from her. She clearly expected the worst from him. As they were escorted from the chamber, Jack wondered what exactly he was supposed to do now. One thing was certain: whatever the Vryxians intended by this gift, he had no intention of treating anyone like property, princess or not. The ride back to the human military base was silent and tense. Princess Callista sat perfectly still, her posture rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. Jack kept glancing at her, trying to think of something to say that wouldn't make this bizarre situation worse. "So," he finally attempted, "are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" The princess flinched slightly at his voice. "I will endure whatever is required, human warrior." Jack sighed. "My name is Jack, Lieutenant Jack Foster, and I don't require anything from you." Her silver eyes narrowed in confusion. This wasn't following the script she had been prepared for. Where was the gloating? The immediate assertion of dominance. Vrexian intelligence had reported that humans kept captives and enjoyed displays of power. When they arrived at the base, a small welcoming committee waited. Captain Lisa Mercer stepped forward. "Lieutenant Foster, your quarters have been adjusted to accommodate your guest." Her tone made it clear what she thought of the whole arrangement. "Captain, can I speak with you privately?" Jack asked. While they spoke in hushed tones a few paces away, Callista assessed her new surroundings. The human military facility seemed primitive compared to Vrexian standards. All hard angles and functional design without the flowing architecture her people preferred. Soldiers walked past, some staring openly at her. She lifted her chin defiantly despite her fear. "Princess," Jack returned, gesturing toward a building. "I'll show you where you'll be staying." She followed him silently, preparing herself for whatever prison they had prepared. Jack opened the door to reveal a modest but clean apartment. "This is usually reserved for visiting officials. It's connected to my quarters through that door, but it locks from your side." He demonstrated the lock. "No one will enter without your permission." Callista stared at him in bewilderment. "I don't understand. Where will you keep me?" "Keep you? This is your room. Your space." Jack rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Look, I know this is weird for both of us. I didn't ask for this arrangement, and I'm sure you didn't either. I was prepared to serve the Empire by becoming your—" She searched for the right human word. "Property. Is this some form of psychological warfare? To make me anticipate worse treatment?" Jack's eyes widened in horror. "No, that's not. We don't." He took a deep breath. "Humans don't own other people. That ended on Earth a long time ago. But you conquered our battle fleet. Your warriors defeated our best generals. By right of conquest." "That's not how we do things," Jack interrupted. "We were defending ourselves. We didn't want this war." Callista's silver eyes studied him intently. Could humans truly be so different from what her people believed? Or was this an elaborate deception? "I've arranged for Dr. Olivia Ryan to check on you tomorrow. She's our xenobiologist and can make sure all your physical needs are met. Food, atmosphere preferences, that sort of thing. You wish me to remain healthy for some purpose," Callista concluded. Jack ran a hand through his short hair in frustration. "The only purpose is basic decency. You're a person, not a thing." The concept seemed to genuinely confuse her. Jack realized the cultural gap between them might be even wider than he'd thought. "I need to report to my commanding officer. There's food in that cooling unit if you're hungry. The bathroom is through there. Just make yourself comfortable, okay?" As Jack left, closing the door behind him, Callista stood motionless in the center of the room. For the first time since being selected for this honor, she allowed herself to relax slightly. The human warrior had surprised her. Perhaps there was more to these creatures than Vrexian intelligence had reported. She approached the window, looking up at the unfamiliar stars of Earth's night sky, wondering what other surprises awaited her in this strange new world. 3 days had passed since Princess Callista's arrival at the human military base. She sat in the small garden area, observing Earth's strange yellow sun as it warmed her blue skin. The sensation was different from the twin red stars of her homeworld, but not unpleasant. "Good morning," Jack called as he approached, carrying 2 steaming cups. "Dr. Ryan said you might like to try this." Callista accepted the offered drink cautiously. After a small sip, her eyes widened slightly. "This tastes like celeberry from the southern continent. How did your doctor know?" "She analyzed your biochemistry and found something compatible with your system that might taste familiar." Jack sat on the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Glad you like it." Over the past days, Callista had been studying the lieutenant carefully. His behavior remained consistent, respectful, distant when appropriate, but never dismissive. It contradicted everything she'd been told about humans. "Your people will be at the diplomatic meeting today?" she asked. Jack nodded. General Parker is leading our delegation. The ceasefire seems to be holding well. A group of soldiers jogged past, some nodding politely to Jack. One called out, "Foster." Basketball game later. Maybe, Jack replied with a casual wave. Callista watched the interaction with interest. Your military structure seems less rigid than ours. Is that common? Depends on the situation. In combat, chain of command is absolute. Downtime is different. He glanced at her. Would you like to see more of the base today? Dr. Ryan cleared you for all non-restricted areas. The princess hesitated only briefly before nodding. Her curiosity was beginning to outweigh her caution. As they walked through the base, Jack explained various facilities. Training grounds, mess hall, recreation areas. Callista was particularly fascinated by the small library. You keep physical information storage. How inefficient, she commented, running 4 fingers along the spine of a book. Jack smiled. Some things we keep for reasons beyond efficiency. Tradition, comfort, preference. A sudden alarm blared through the base, causing Callista to startle. Jack immediately tensed, his posture shifting to alert readiness. "Security breach in Sector 7, announced a voice over the speakers. All personnel to stations. Come with me, Jack said firmly, taking Callista's arm. We need to get you somewhere secure. They moved quickly through corridors that were suddenly filled with hurrying personnel. Callista could sense Jack's heightened awareness, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. What's happening? She asked. Could be nothing. Could be. An explosion shook the building, cutting him off. Smoke began filling the corridor ahead. Jack immediately changed direction, pulling Callista down a side passage. Behind them, she heard shouting and what she recognized as weapon fire. In here, Jack guided her into a small storage room, shutting the door behind them. Stay low. Heavy footsteps passed by outside. Jack positioned himself between Callista and the door, his hand on his sidearm. Are these your people attacking? She whispered. Jack shook his head. Doubtful. More likely a third party that wants the peace talks to fail. The realization struck her. He was protecting her at potential risk to himself. Not as property to be preserved, but as a person of value. When the all-clear finally sounded an hour later, they learned that a small group of mercenaries had attempted to breach the base. Their target remained unclear, but 3 intruders had been captured. That evening, as Callista returned to her quarters, she found herself reviewing her understanding of humans, particularly one human. Lieutenant Jack Foster had shown courage, quick thinking, and most surprisingly, a willingness to place himself in danger to protect someone who was, by any measure, still a stranger. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Princess Callista slept without fear. A week after the attack, Callista found herself drawn to the communication center. Jack had granted her limited access as a gesture of growing trust, allowing her to receive cultural transmissions from her homeworld. But today, something was wrong with the signal. These interference patterns aren't natural, she muttered, adjusting the controls with her slender blue fingers. The screen flickered, then displayed a message fragment in Phyrexian script. Callista's silver eyes widened as she translated the words. Confirm disposal of the royal gift. Once tensions escalate. Her hands trembled as she downloaded the partial message to a data crystal. This couldn't be what it seemed. Her own people wouldn't use her as a disposable pawn. Would they? She found Jack in the training yard, demonstrating combat techniques to junior officers. Watching him move with practiced precision, Callista was reminded that despite his kindness, he was indeed a warrior. Lieutenant Foster, she called, maintaining the formal address they used in public. May I speak with you privately? Jack noticed her distress immediately. What's wrong? In his office, Callista placed the data crystal on his desk. I intercepted this communication. It's concerning. Jack activated the reader, frowning at the unfamiliar script. What does it say? It appears I wasn't sent as a gift of peace, Callista said, her voice carefully controlled. I was sent to die. Jack's expression darkened as she explained her translation. You think you were meant to be killed. Why? To provide justification for continued war. Callista's inner eyelids fluttered with emotion. The death of a royal at human hands would rally my people like nothing else. Jack paced the small office. But who would benefit from prolonging the conflict? The casualty reports from both sides are devastating. Someone who profits from war itself, Callista suggested. My father's war minister, perhaps. Or someone else entirely, Jack finished. He sat down, meeting her gaze directly. Callista, I need to know. Do you trust me enough to work together on this? The question hung between them. A month ago, she would have laughed at the idea of trusting a human. Now, she found herself nodding without hesitation. Then let's decode the rest of this message. I know someone who can help. Specialist Alex Winters wasn't what Callista expected. The young communications expert wore non-regulation glasses and seemed more excited about meeting an alien princess than concerned about potential conspiracy. This encryption is impressive, Alex said, typing rapidly. Military grade, but not standard Phyrexian protocol from what we've captured before, almost like a private channel. Hours passed as they worked to decode more fragments. Jack brought food and stayed, his presence a quiet support that Callista found herself appreciating more than she would have expected. Got it, Alex exclaimed finally. It's a communication between someone in the Phyrexian High Command. And this is strange, a human corporation. The decoded message appeared on screen. Jack read it aloud, his voice growing harder with each word. Confirm disposal of the royal gift once tensions escalate. Galactic Dynamics will ensure production contracts triple in value after renewed hostilities. Galactic Dynamics? Callista asked. Weapons manufacturer, Jack explained grimly. They've been supplying our military for the past decade. Looks like they've been supplying both sides. Callista felt cold realization spread through her. We've been manipulated, both our peoples. And you were meant to be the spark for an even bigger war. Jack's hand clenched into a fist. A war that would make certain people very, very rich. Their eyes met, human and alien, united by a shared understanding of betrayal. For the first time, Callista saw Jack not as a human warrior, but simply as an ally, perhaps even a friend. What do we do now? She asked softly. Jack's expression was determined. We fight back, not against each other, but against those who would use us as pawns. Callista straightened, royal determination replacing her shock. Then we will need proof that will convince both our governments. And we'll need to be careful, Jack added. If they're willing to sacrifice a princess for profit, they won't hesitate to eliminate us both. We need help, Jack said, closing the blinds in his office. People we can trust completely. Callista nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light. Who do you have in mind? Jack made 2 quick calls. 20 minutes later, Lieutenant Grace Martinez and communications specialist Ethan Powell slipped quietly into the room. Grace, a sharp-eyed woman with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, assessed Callista with professional curiosity. Ethan, lanky with nervous hands, kept glancing at the locked door. What's so urgent, Foster? Grace asked, leaning against the desk. Jack shared their discovery, showing the decoded messages. Ethan whistled low. Galactic Dynamics. They're massive. Their CEO golfs with generals and politicians. Grace frowned. I never liked them. Their equipment always seemed designed to need constant replacement. By the 7 moons, Callista murmured. The same complaints existed among our military leaders. The 4 huddled around a digital map as Jack outlined their plan. We need access to Galactic Dynamics secure servers. If they've been manipulating both sides, there will be evidence. Their main facility is heavily guarded, Grace pointed out. Callista leaned forward, but perhaps not against Phyrexian technology. She removed a slender bracelet from her wrist. This contains royal access codes. It was meant for emergency extraction. You had this all along? Jack asked, surprised. I wasn't sure I could trust you with it, she admitted. Now I'm sure I can. Ethan examined the bracelet with fascination. This could bypass their security systems if I can interface it with our tech. And I can get us into the facility, Grace added. I trained with their security chief before he left the military. They worked through the night, developing their plan. Callista proved surprisingly knowledgeable about computer systems, helping Ethan modify equipment to work with her bracelet. Where did you learn this? Jack asked as he watched her delicate fingers reconfigure circuits. Royal Vrexians are educated in all technologies from birth, she explained without looking up. Knowledge is power, Lieutenant Foster. Jack, he corrected gently. After all this, I think we're past formalities. Her eyes met his briefly, and she nodded. Jack then. The next morning, they put their plan into motion. Grace arranged a meeting with her former colleague on the pretext of reviewing new security protocols. Her security clearance got them into the outer offices of Galactic Dynamics. Remember, Jack whispered as they walked through the gleaming corporate headquarters, we need proof that will convince both governments. Callista, disguised in human clothing with a hood concealing her blue skin, stayed close to Jack. The central server room should be 3 levels down. Using Grace's distraction of the security team, Jack, Callista, and Ethan slipped into a restricted elevator. Callista's bracelet, now wired to Ethan's tablet, overrode the security lock. I'm in, Ethan whispered as they entered the dimly lit server room. Downloading now. Jack stood guard at the door, while Callista helped Ethan navigate the system. Minutes stretched tensely as the download progressed. Found something big, Ethan said suddenly. Payments to officials on both sides. Meeting minutes. They'd been planning this war for years. Jack's communicator vibrated. Grace's warning. Security is suspicious. Get out now. As they rushed toward the exit, an alarm blared. Heavy security doors began closing throughout the facility. This way. Callista pulled them toward a maintenance shaft. I memorized the building schematics. They squeezed through the narrow passage just as guards rushed into the server room. Crawling through dusty ventilation ducts, they finally emerged in a loading dock. Grace was waiting in a transport vehicle, engine running. Did you get it? Ethan held up his tablet triumphantly. Everything. Communications, bribes, plans, even a list of conspirators in both governments. As they sped away from the facility, Callista felt something unexpected, a surge of satisfaction. For the first time in her life, she wasn't simply following royal protocol or fulfilling duty. She was choosing her own path. Jack caught her expression and smiled. Not bad for a princess and a soldier. We're more than that now, she replied softly. We're revolutionaries. The safe house wasn't much, a small cabin on the outskirts of the military zone. But it would have to do. Jack scanned the perimeter one more time while Ethan set up his equipment on the kitchen table. How long until we can transmit the evidence? Callista asked, helping Grace unpack supplies. I need to encrypt it first, Ethan replied, fingers flying over his keyboard. If the wrong people intercept this data before it reaches the right authorities, we're dead. A soft beep from Jack's communicator interrupted them. His face darkened as he read the message. We've been compromised. Colonel Ward just issued orders for my arrest and Callista's detention for security reasons. Grace cursed under her breath. Ward, he's not even in your chain of command. He's on the list, Ethan confirmed, pulling up the data they'd stolen. Major investor in Galactic Dynamics through shell companies. Callista's silver eyes narrowed. How did they discover us so quickly? Someone talked, Jack said grimly, checking his weapon. We need to move. Now. They packed essential equipment in minutes. As they loaded the transport vehicle, the distant sound of helicopter rotors reached them. They're coming, Grace warned. The 4 sped away from the cabin just as searchlights appeared on the horizon. Jack drove recklessly down rural roads, taking random turns to throw off pursuit. Where are we going? Callista asked, bracing herself as they bounced over rough terrain. "My family has a farm about 200 miles north," Grace explained. "Off the grid, no electronic footprint. If we can make it there, we'll have time to regroup." The night passed in tense silence as they evaded patrols and checkpoints. By dawn, exhaustion was taking its toll. Jack's eyes were red-rimmed, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "Let me drive," Callista offered. "My species requires less rest than yours." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "There's a maintenance road ahead. We'll switch there." As they pulled over, Grace's communicator chirped. Her face went pale as she read the message. "It's my brother. They've already searched my parents' farm. They're watching all known associates. How could they be ahead of us?" Ethan wondered aloud. Jack's expression turned to stone. "Because they knew our plans before we made them. We have a traitor." All eyes turned to each other, trust suddenly fragile. Jack sighed heavily. "It's not one of us four. It's someone back at base who noticed what we were doing." A distant explosion made them all jump. Smoke rose from the direction they had come. "The cabin," Grace whispered. "They're not taking chances." They abandoned the transport in a ravine, continuing on foot through dense forest. Callista struggled with the unfamiliar terrain, her physiology better suited to the smooth surfaces of Phyrexian architecture. "Here," Jack offered his hand, helping her over a fallen log. "Stay close." As night fell again, they found shelter in an abandoned hunting lodge, while Grace and Ethan worked to establish a secure connection. Jack and Callista stood watch at the windows. "This wasn't what I expected when I came to Earth," Callista said softly, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. "Being hunted by your own people and mine." Jack managed a small smile. "Finding someone worth fighting beside," she corrected. Their eyes met in the dim light. Jack reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against her blue ones. She didn't pull away. "When this is over," he started. "Guys," Ethan called urgently. "We've got something." They rushed to where he had set up his equipment. On the screen, a message flashed in both human and Phyrexian script. "It's from my father's senior advisor," Callista gasped. "She's requesting secure contact." "Could be a trap," Grace warned. "Or it could be our only chance," Jack countered. There are still good people on both sides. As they prepared to make contact, the distant sound of vehicles approaching reached their ears. Jack drew his weapon, positioning himself between the door and Callista. "Make the call," he told Ethan. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." Callista touched Jack's arm. "Whatever happens, I want you to know something." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm glad it was you they gave me to." The vehicles surrounded the hunting lodge, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Jack peered through the window, counting at least 20 armed personnel. "Ethan, how's that transmission coming?" he asked, checking his weapon one last time. "Almost there," Ethan replied, his voice tense. "The encryption is complicated." Callista joined Jack at the window, her silver eyes reflecting the approaching lights. "There are Phyrexian soldiers among them. I recognize the formation." A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Lieutenant Foster, Princess Callista. This is Colonel Ward. You are surrounded. Surrender immediately." Grace positioned herself at the back door. "At least now we know who's behind this." "Not for long," Ethan announced triumphantly. Transmission complete. The data is now in the hands of Advisor Vreshka on the Phyrexian side and General Harris on ours. Jack took a deep breath. Now we just need to survive long enough for it to matter. The front door splintered as a battering ram hit it. Jack pulled Callista away from the window just as gunfire shattered the glass. "This way," Grace called, opening a trapdoor beneath a rug. Old moonshine tunnel from Prohibition days. They dropped into the narrow passage as the doors gave way above them. The tunnel was damp and low, forcing them to crouch as they ran. Behind them, shouts echoed as their escape was discovered. "It leads to the river," Grace explained between breaths. "About half a mile." They emerged from the tunnel into pouring rain. The river rushed past, swollen with recent storms. "We can't cross that," Ethan said, staring at the churning water. "We don't have to," Callista pointed upstream. "Look." Through the rain, they could make out the lights of approaching vehicles, but these were coming from the opposite direction of their pursuers. "Could be more hostiles," Grace warned. Jack squinted through the downpour. "No, those are military transports. Official ones." The vehicles skidded to a stop, and soldiers poured out, but instead of attacking, they formed a protective perimeter. A tall figure stepped forward, shielded by an umbrella. "General Harris," Jack breathed in relief. "Foster, get your team over here now," the general shouted over the storm. As they reached the protection of the military unit, Callista noticed several Phyrexian officers among them. One stepped forward, bowing deeply to her. "Your Highness, Advisor Vreshka sends her regards. Your evidence has reached the Emperor." Shots rang out from the direction of the hunting lodge. Colonel Ward's forces had caught up to them. "Take cover," General Harris ordered, pushing Jack and Callista toward an armored vehicle. What followed was a brief but intense firefight. From the safety of the transport, they watched as Ward's mercenaries realized they were outnumbered by legitimate forces from both governments. "Colonel Ward is attempting to flee," a communications officer reported. "Not for long," General Harris replied, watching as Phyrexian soldiers cut off Ward's escape route. Within 20 minutes, it was over. Ward and several Galactic Dynamics executives were in custody. The evidence Jack and Callista had gathered was already being broadcast across both human and Phyrexian communications networks. 3 days later, they stood in the grand meeting hall of the human military headquarters. Representatives from both species filled the room as peace talks resumed, this time with genuine intent. "The weapons manufacturers have been charged with crimes against both our peoples," General Harris announced. "Thanks to the courage of Lieutenant Foster and Princess Callista, we have uncovered a conspiracy that nearly led us to mutual destruction." Jack, dressed in his formal uniform, stood tall beside Callista. She wore traditional Phyrexian royal attire, but with a human military pin attached, a gift from Jack. "What happens now?" he asked quietly as officials from both sides signed preliminary peace documents. Callista's hand found his, blue fingers intertwining with human ones. "Now we build something new. My father has appointed me permanent ambassador to Earth." "And what about us?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, her silver eyes warm. "We were meant to be a symbol of peace through an ancient, misguided tradition. Perhaps we still can be, but on our own terms." As the dignitaries applauded the signed treaty, Jack and Callista stood together, no longer captor and captive, warrior and prize, but partners who had found understanding across the stars. "To think," Jack mused, "they gave an alien princess to a human warrior because she feared for her life. And instead," Callista finished, "we gave both our worlds a future."